안녕하세요. 유튜브 훈스푼 채널을 운영하는 수능 영어 강사 윤흥관입니다. 오늘은 EBS 수특 영어 전지문 ASMR을 시작하겠습니다. EBS 교재의 게이트웨이, 즉 수능 기출 지문과 그리고 실용문 혹은 도표와 같은 내용이 들어가 있지 않은 그러한 부분들은 제외하고 모두 전지문을 읽어나가는 시간을 가져볼 건데요. 등교 혹은 하교 아니면 이제 자기 전에 들으면서 EBS 지문에 익숙해지고자 하는 분들이 도움을 받아갔으면 좋겠습니다. 평소에는 제가 영국식 영어 발음으로 수업을 진행하고 그리고 ASMR도 그런 식으로 많이 진행을 해왔는데 오늘은 미국식 악센트로 한번 진행을 해보도록 할게요. 자, 전지문이기 때문에 여러분들이 편하게 들으시길 바라고, 그리고 혹시 내용적인 부분들이 궁금하거나 하면은 질문해 주시면 되겠습니다. 혹은 이제 강의를 참고하시길 바랍니다. 자, 그렇다면은 파트가 세 부분으로 나눠져 있는데 여러분들이 교재에는 Part 1 유형편, 그리고 Part 2 주제 소재편, 그리고 Part 3 테스트편이라고 나와 있죠. 그 중에서 첫 번째 Part 1부터 시작해 보도록 하겠습니다. 글의 목적 파악. Exercise 1. 다음 글의 목적으로 가장 적절한 것은? Can't leave the office or home to volunteer? No problem. Like almost everything these days, there is also a way to volunteer and help others out from the comfort of your living room, couch, or office chair. Many organizations need help with administrative tasks that can be completed digitally. If you're a computer whiz and are working at a job where you're supposed to look busy even when you're not, virtual volunteering might be the way to offer your expertise or mentor someone while still taking care of your work at your desk. Our website lists countless virtual volunteering opportunities. Go there to find one that suits your interests. With just a computer or phone, you can lend your talents to anything from advocacy and human rights to education and literacy, even to organizations that are not necessarily close to home. Tasks can range from making phone calls to helping get out the vote to designing a non-profit's website. Stop by our website and start virtual volunteering today. Exercise 2. 다음 글의 목적으로 가장 적절한 것은? At Metro Bank, we try to provide banking facilities of highest quality in order to accurately meet our customers' needs. To do this, it is essential that we listen to what our customers have to say. We would like you to help us by giving us your opinion of Metro Bank's services. We are asking an independent market research company, MIC Limited, to interview a number of customers over the next few weeks. MIC Limited is a reliable company, and your individual responses will be kept completely confidential. They will be conducting the interviews by telephone, so an interviewer may telephone you at some point over the next few weeks. Because MIC Limited will choose who to interview, you might not be contracted at all. If you are, we would value your contribution and hope you will be able to help us if asked. Exercise 3. 다음 글의 목적으로 가장 적절한 것은? Dear friend, at Christmas time, our auditorium is transformed into a dinner club with festive lights, entertainment, a full-course turkey dinner, and of course, Santa Claus. Our patients and their loved ones have the chance to be together, to enjoy themselves in a pleasant atmosphere at this time of year when families should be together. This is Cafe Noel, one of the many special holiday events we at Calvary host for our patients and their families. Calvary Hospital plans Cafe Noel at Christmas time every year. But to continue this unique program, we need your help. Your holiday gift of $15, $20, $25 or whatever you can afford at this time will help us to make the holidays a very special time for our patients and their loved ones. Please send your holiday gift today. Exercise 4. 다음 글의 목적으로 가장 적절한 것은 Dear Mayor Johnson, I have always appreciated the open line of communication you keep with your residents and your willingness to take action on their concerns. I have noticed something else that can improve our city. Although the zoo has been expanded and the Children's Museum recently opened up, our city doesn't have a splash park for children. A splash park would provide kids with a convenient place to get exercise and stay cool in hot summer. And it would be free, benefiting all the families with children. Normally, splash parks are installed in a regular park. I think that the park near the post office would work since it has a lot of room. Your consideration of this proposition would be much more appreciated. Thank you for reading my letter. I look forward to your reply. Sincerely, Stiller Baker. Chapter 2. 심경 분위기 파악. Exercise 1. 다음 글에 드러난 아이의 심경 변화로 가장 적절한 것은 Just as I was approaching 30, I was offered a sponsorship to go to the latest professional golf association in the USA and attend their qualifying school. But I was very concerned about my family rather than thinking it was a good opportunity. If I accepted the sponsorship offer, I couldn't continue to work to mom to help her out and to earn us some extra income between amateur golf tours. This would mean there would be less money coming in to begin with, though the sponsorship money would support me through the qualifying school. Of course, there was a small chance I could make the grade to become a professional, which should lead to higher earning opportunities. It was a risk for us financially. I don't want to leave you in trouble, Mom. Never mind about that, daughter. Of course you must do this. It was a wonderful opportunity. We'll manage, she smiled. We always have up to now, and it's time for you to step out and take the chance. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. If you don't give it a go, you'll always regret it. I was so glad to receive her support. Thanks to her words, I was able to move on to my goal with a lighter heart. Exercise 2. 다음 글에 드러난 아이의 심경으로 가장 적절한 것은 It was the day when I had the opportunity to attend my first board meeting. I arrived early. It was a great honor that I had been asked to join them as a board member. Their mission was important. The other members were powerful, highly respected women from across the nation. I had heard about their work and their reputations for years. I was finally going to get a chance to meet them. As I walked into the meeting room, someone from the organization was already there, getting ready for the meeting. Caterers were bringing delicious treats and hot coffee. I looked at the big mahogany table and quickly saw that name tags and binders were already being arranged and placed on the table. I saw my name with a handwritten note from the president welcoming me to my first meeting. Quite frankly, I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. Exercise 3. 다음 글의 상황에 나타난 분위기로 가장 적절한 것은 Callie turned away from the Christmas tree and saw her mother fussing at the table sink. She was a few inches shorter than Callie and still healthy at 53. She looked to be in her early 40s with fine wisdom lines showing only when she smiled. Today, she was smiling. She loved nothing better than to have all of her children in the house sharing fun and food. The table was lined with shrimp and cocktail sauce, hot wings with dips, Swedish meatballs, ham and turkey, not to mention the variety of vegetables, and dinner rolls. There was far too much food for 13 people, but the leftovers were already divided up and tradition continued. Mom called the family into the living room. It's that time. She smiled as she handed out stockings to everyone. This too was a tradition. The stockings held small things for each individual as well as candies and fun stuff. Exercise 4. 다음 글에 드러난 아이의 심경 변화로 가장 적절한 것은? The door opened into our office area and a voice said to the secretary, "Where does bully sit?" It was the CEO's and I could hear him walking toward my office. He was a tall, muscular man. Suddenly, he was standing in my doorway with his right arm raised. I was thinking, he's going to punch me. I was frozen as he walked over the desk. I braced myself for the impact and he laid his arm on my shoulder and said, "Nice job, Bolia. It took a lot of courage to speak against me and you showed a lot of integrity. You never backed down and you described the future for the company that I had not considered." As he walked out the door, he said, "I wanted you to be the first to know that I approved the project you suggested." I was stunned. I had gone from near fainting, for fear of losing my job, to the delighted state of conquering warrior, satisfied with myself for sticking up for what I felt was right. Within minutes, people were walking into my office congratulating me. An uplifting experience that had me holding my head up high. Chapter 3. 함축적 의미 파악. Exercise 1. 밑줄 친 hold their cards too close to the vest가 다음 글에서 의미하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은? We are often told that there is no innovation without competition, which is absurd given that most of the greatest innovations in science and technology have resulted from the sharing of research across academic silos, national borders, and language barriers. In truth, no great innovations occur in isolation. Personally, I have been asked to sign an awfully large number of non-disclosure agreements from other researchers terrified that their ideas will get out. But in truth, I found this approach counterproductive. Those who hold their cards too close to the vest are rarely the ones who play the winning hand. It is when we share our findings with people with other areas of expertise or perspectives, or seek feedback about our concept from someone in a different field, or try out our idea with potential users, that suddenly the real potential starts to emerge. Exercise 2. 밑줄 친 무하마드 must go to the mountain. 이 다음 글에서 의미하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은? A family from Israel who moved to Northern California was amazed by the isolation they experienced when they moved into their San Francisco neighborhood. They had lived in a kibbutz, where they experienced a strong sense of community in every sense of the word. When we moved here, said the father, it was culture shock. People nodded and smiled with a brief hello coming and going, and then disappeared into their own dwelling, and we wouldn't see them again for days at a time. One night, my wife suggested that if the mountain wasn't going to come to Muhammad, then Muhammad must go to the mountain. It was at that point that we realized we had a gift to bring to our neighbors, the gift of community. Over the next few months, the family organized a block party, a neighborhood yard sale, and an open house brunch. Each was a big success. People became friends, and the connection snowballed. A small babysitting co-op began in the neighborhood, as well as a family neighborhood cleanup event that took place at the beginning of each season on a Saturday morning. Exercise 3. 밑줄 친. Behind the open door, several differences are hidden. 2. 다음 글에서 의미하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은. It may sound rather trite to say that the first function of the picture is to show its object. But the object of the picture is not always the one you think it is. It's obvious through the photographs the journalist brings back from the field that he shows the situation he witnessed. Through the paintings he produces, the painter shows his subject as much as his own sensibility. And the filmmaker, through the film he makes, can also show his own vision of the world. Thus, through these few examples, you can understand that behind the open door, several differences are hidden. But perhaps that's not the main thing. In fact, whether it's fictional or informative, it is very rare that the picture isn't accompanied by a comment. However incomplete it may be, that specifies its meaning or context. It may be a title in the case of painting, an article of several hundred words in the case of a press photo, or the outlines of a scenario in the case of a film. Exercise 4. 밑줄 친. That shoe best fits the species who possesses feet to wear it. 2. 다음 글에서 의미하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은. To destroy a whale is a monumental denial of life, and barely one symbol of the human species, rather, recently hatred for the world. We have named one whale killer, but that shoe best fits the species who possesses feet to wear it. Whales are more appreciated than ever, and whale watching wields more lucre than killing does. In that appeal to our self-centeredness lies their best hope. But even if all of us gain the emotional and intellectual maturity to finally divest ourselves from harming them, we may yet lose them in an ocean of plastics, chemicals, fishing tangles, spinning propellers, speeding hulls, and noise. All whales now have trouble competing with the aquatic primate for the fishes of the sea. The more humans fill the world, the more we empty it. Exercise 5. 밑줄 친. Practice a form of technological silence가 다음 글에서 의미하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은. There are people who do not obsessively go after the latest digital devices, taking their time before changing hardware. There are even some people who have developed a taste for vintage technology, not only for vintage decoration or fashion. None of these cases reveal an ultimate or total renouncement of technology, but rather a temporary interruption for its use or a preference for a slower pace. We consider it appropriate to include in this list the so-called slow movement. With its taste for slowness and tranquility, since often technologies are used precisely to speed up some processes in life. The movement was born as an alternative to fast food, but quickly it spread to other realms of life. Whoever chooses slowness may indeed practice a form of technological silence. This path of slowness, we also find the many forms of meditation, whether traditional or new, that are so fashionable nowadays, and that can be seen as a way to temporarily refrain from technology. Exercise 6. 밑줄 친 an equal number of words as of things가 다음 글에서 의미하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은? Modern scientific writing in English began in the 17th century, with authors such as Francis Bacon, Robert Boyle, and Isaac Newton. This period was characterized by intense debates over the nature of language generally. At issue was the presumed power of words to control knowledge, as Bacon put it, to force and overrule the understanding, throw all into confusion, and lead men away into numberless empty controversies and idle fancies. Bacon was thus the first to claim revolt against the Elizabethan styles of writing, which of course included Shakespearean drama. These, he said, pulled the veil between the intellect and the world. To advance knowledge, especially the new experimental philosophy, there was a simple, direct, and unadorned form of speech needed. This would lift the veil and provide an equal number of words as of things. Exercise 7. 밑줄 친 Our relationship with nature is, and always was, less romantic이 다음 글에서 의미하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은? That so many species now live alongside us in human-modified environments, whether on intensive farmland in Britain or in regenerating forests in Costa Rica, is now not to say that any human society, past or present, has ever lived in harmony with nature. This is absolutely not the case. The harmonious coexistence of humans and the rest of nature in the distant past is a romanticized and largely fictional notion. Present-day conservation often attempts to recreate these idealized ecosystems, for example by the reintroduction of human hunter-gatherer style burning of vegetation in America, Africa, Australia, and by reinstating now uneconomic medieval farming and forestry practices in Europe and Asia. In truth, our relationship with nature is, and always was, less romantic. We eat nature, we take up space that wild nature would otherwise occupy. We have used whatever technologies have been available to us at a particular time to consume or oust wild creatures, often with great success. As a consequence, we are living through a time of extinction. Exercise 8. 밑줄 친 Our sin will find us out. 이 다음 글에서 의미하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은? Emerson said, "What you are, speak so loudly that people can't hear what you say." Of course, one of the greatest principles of effective advertisement copywriting is to believe yourself what you're trying to make others believe. Somebody asked me in the marketing course that I was giving at New York University, "What do you think is the first requirement for success in advertising?" I said, "Good health." There's nothing to laugh about. I can't conceive how a dyspeptic could write good mincemeat copy, or a man with rheumatism could write about the joy of riding over mountain roads in an automobile. You have to have good human equipment to enjoy the things you are trying to sell, where you can't make other people enjoy them. I believe the public has a sixth sense of detecting insincerity, and we run a tremendous risk if we try to make other people believe in something we don't believe in. Somehow, our sin will find us out. Chapter 4. 요지, 주장 파악. Exercise 1. 다음 글의 요지로 가장 적절한 것은 Unless we are very, very careful, we doom each other by holding on to images of one another based on preconceptions that are in turn based on indifferences to what is other than ourselves. This indifference can be, in its extreme, a form of murder and seems to me a rather common phenomenon. We claim autonomy for ourselves and forget that in so doing, we can fall into tyranny of defining other people as we would like them to be. By focusing on what we choose to acknowledge in them, we impose an insidious control on them. I notice that I have to pay careful attention in order to listen to others with an openness that allows them to be as they are or as they think themselves to be. The shutters of my mind habitually flip open and click shut, and these little snaps form into patterns that I arrange for myself. The opposite of this inattention is love, is the honoring of others in a way that grants them the grace of their own autonomy and allows mutual discovery. Exercise 2. 다음 글의 요지로 가장 적절한 것은 Designing, building, operating, upgrading, and eventually retiring infrastructure projects is an expensive process. As aging infrastructure is repaired and retrofitted, and as new infrastructure is constructed, incorporating future risks from climate change impacts into their design, construction, and operation must become routine. Failing to take those risks into account will likely lead to increased maintenance and operating costs and shortened service life. Failing to screen projects for climate resilience will lead to more waste and more infrastructure collapse. The stronger infrastructure required may come with a significant upfront cost, but employing thoughtful design strategies can allow for making relatively modest resilience investments now, while still planning for more extreme events down the road. This approach could well be cheaper than having to retrofit the infrastructure from scratch if conditions worsen beyond expectations. Exercise 3. 다음 글의 요지로 가장 적절한 것은 All musics have a history and all music changes, has always been changing, though at various rates and not always in the same direction. It would be foolish to assume that the music world of India, because it is largely melodic and without harmony, somehow represents an earlier stage through which Western music has already passed, or that Europeans in the days when they lived in tribes had music similar to that of Native Americans. Music does not uniformly change from simple to complex. Each music has its own unique history, related to the history of its culture, to the way people adopt their natural and social environment. The patterns we may discern in the world's music history usually have to do with the relationships of cultures to one another. Thus, the 20th century, as Western-derived culture has affected most others, most non-Western musics now show some influences of Western music. However, the results of this influence vary from culture to culture. Exercise 4. 다음 글의 요지로 가장 적절한 것은? Archaeology is a mode of production of the past. This would seem to be recognized by those many archaeologists and textbooks that talk at length of archaeological techniques. Archaeology is seen as technology. The past has left remains, and they decay in the ground. According to their interest, an archaeologist works on the material remains to make something of them. So excavation is invention, discovery, or culture, where archaeologists craft remains of the past into forms of which are meaningful. The archaeological record is accordingly not a record at all, but made, not given, data. The past is gone and lost in a fortiori through the equivocality of things and the character of society as constituted through meaning, never existed as a definitive entity, the present anyway. An archaeologist has a raw material, the remains of the past, and turns it into something, data, a report, set of drawings, a museum exhibition, an archive, a television program, evidence in an academic controversy, and perhaps that which is termed knowledge of the past. This is a mode of production. Exercise 5. 다음 필자가 주장하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은? An educational institution that I have been associated with recently went through a particularly traumatic time when the credibility of administration was questioned by faculty and staff. Various organization consultants were interviewed to facilitate a healing process. Most of the consultants spoke of making the necessary structural changes to create a culture of trust. The institution finally hired a consultant whose attitude was the organizational structure has nothing to do with the trust. Interpersonal relations based on mutual respect and an atmosphere of goodwill are what creates a culture of trust. Would you rather work as part of the school with an outstanding reputation or work as part of a group of outstanding individuals? Many times these two characteristics go together, but if one had to make a choice, I believe that most people would opt to work with outstanding individuals. Exercise 6. 다음 글에서 필자가 주장하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은? We all have been blessed with intellect. It is up to us to develop what we have been given. The true intellectual does not gloat in what she knows, for no one has the capacity to know everything, and only the fool pretends otherwise. Knowledge has no finish line. Instead, as with life, it's merely a perceptual marathon full of potential and pitfalls. Intellect is not to be celebrated. It should be constantly and humbly improved. The more one learns, the more one understands that he or she actually knows very little. Mastering one topic means very little in the sense that an infinite amount of new topics remain alive and waiting to be tackled. There is no better way to travel the journey of life than with a book held greedily in hand. Exercise 7. 다음 글에서 필자가 주장하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은? Much of the written evidence historians of ancient times must use is the equivalent of what our legal system calls hearsay. It comes from writers who lived long after the events that they relate and often contains much local folklore and tradition that may or may not be accurate. Furthermore, sometimes the level of hearsay between the witness and the original event is even greater. The writings of some ancient authors survive only in quotations from their work by other ancient figures. The history of Egypt written by Manetho, an Egyptian priest of the early 3rd century BCE, is known only through such quotations. The same is true for the work of the Hellenistic Babylonian priest Berosus. Thus, not only were these authors writing long after the events they were describing, but we also have the added problem of trying to decide whether or not they were quoted correctly. Obviously, the historians have to analyze such sources with great care and seek independent validation of their testimony from archaeology or other texts. Exercise 8. 다음 글에서 필자가 주장하는 바로 가장 적절한 것은 Ordinary citizens are often keen to blame minority or culturally oppressed groups for their problems or failures. Often, this can be explained by ignorance or fear. If we do not know or understand the culture of minority or oppressed group, it is easy to see its behavior as unacceptable or uncivilized, and therefore not worthy of consideration or respect. Only when we come to understand another culture's ways can we start to realize that it is, like ours, only human and neither totally wrong nor totally right. Should be a part of a journalist's role to give readers the information they need to reach sensible decisions, not to play on their fears and prejudices. If journalists tell people only what they expect to hear about minority or oppressed groups, then the debate about their position in society is not advanced. It is part of the journalist's duty to help advance society's awareness of such problems by providing people with a wider truth than their existing prejudices. Chapter 5. 주제 파악. Exercise 1. Our addiction to criticizing others in a huge block to effectively giving feedback. When we criticize, even if we choose our words with care, we are likely to assign others to a specific, potentially harmful status. We are likely to assign others, for instance, to the status of being wrong. No one likes to be labeled wrong. Most people get defensive when they are labeled, even when sure they are not wrong. And what's more important, defensive people block messages. Unless you're trying not to be understood, then criticism is not an effective communication strategy. And it doesn't help to call it constructive either. Saying something like, I'm telling you this for your own development, your design is all wrong, isn't going to produce positive results. Criticism is criticism. It blocks understanding. Exercise 2. 다음 글의 주제로 가장 적절한 것은 The competitive arena is by its very nature difficult, unpredictable, and uncontrollable. Despite their best efforts, athletes can never prepare for every eventuality that may occur in competition or control everything that may influence their performances. Routines offer a structure within which to prepare for performance and the flexibility to adjust to the uncertain nature of competition. Because routines are not inviolate, but rather provide a guide for athletes to follow, they can also be readily altered to fit the demands of a guide for athletes to follow. They can also readily alter to fit the demands of a unique or unexpected competitive environment. Unforeseen changes in the competitive setting, such as weather, unexpected opponents, late arrival, insufficient warm-up space, and broken or lost equipment, can have a disturbing and disruptive effect on athletes before a competition. Athletes often perform below expectations because they are unable to respond appropriately to these occurrences or become unsettled mentally. E.g., lose motivation or confidence, get distracted, or experience anxiety. Athletes with well-organized yet flexible routines will be better able to respond positively to these challenges, keep calm, and maintain a high level of performance. Exercise 3. 다음 글의 주제로 가장 적절한 것은? We tend to think of many myths as rather silly old stories about the adventures and misadventures of gods, warriors, and demons invented by primitive people to explain a world they could not understand in our modern scientific sense. But it is a mistake to dismiss these stories as trivial, and old-fashioned, with no more important meaning for humanity. Scholars such as Joseph Campbell and Claude Lévi-Strauss have shown that common themes in myths from many diverse cultures speak to us about the universal concerns of all people and about ways of thought that all humans share. As we move increasingly toward a unified world, a global village, as it has been called, it is important to see how much basic human nature we all share. The systemic study of mythology reveals important points about the human psyche, about universal human motivations, fears, thought patterns. Exercise 4. 다음 글의 주제로 가장 적절한 것은? When we think of medieval Europe, there is a tendency to think primarily in terms of what is visible today. The buildings and cathedrals, the literature and the scholastic philosophy. Yet, what is of equal importance, particularly from the standpoint of the rise of modern science, is the fact that medieval culture was a mechanically sophisticated culture, even if little remains today of their machines. For example, Albert Magnus, the teacher of Aquinas, is rumored to have had a robot in his laboratory that could raise a hand and give a greeting. The story is no doubt apocryphal, but there was in any case a great interest in machines, even if science itself was primitive and qualitative. What is clear is that the spread of mechanical clock technology was underway by the beginning of the 14th century. It is also clear that there was a multiplicity of machines at this time with clockwork mechanisms, ranging from monastic alarms, musical machines, and astronomical simulators to striking clocks. Chapter 6. 제목 파악. Exercise 1. 다음 글의 제목으로 가장 적절한 것은? Many of us tend to feel uncomfortable making requests of anyone beyond our inner circle of family and close friends. But in doing so, we vastly underestimate the responsiveness of weak ties. Our acquaintances and people we don't know very well. Weak ties are extremely valuable because they are the bridges between social circles. Novel information, new solutions to problems, and other resources travel across the bridges. We also vastly underestimate the responsiveness of dormant ties, the connections we once had with that we haven't maintained. For example, most people wouldn't even consider reaching out to a high school classmate they haven't seen in 25 years to ask for a job laid. We assume such attempts to reconnect would be rejected, or that our former classmate would resent our reaching out only to ask for a favor. But most people in your past would actually welcome hearing from and helping you, according to organizational researchers. The passage of time doesn't erase shared history of understanding, emotions, and trust. Exercise 2. 다음 글의 제목으로 가장 적절한 것은 Many times our greatest growth periods come through the experience of pain. Those of us who have experienced a dark time in life through serious illness or emotional trauma know the opportunity it brings for enormous wisdom and insight. Sometimes we have to experience the contrast of darkness in order to find the light. Indeed, there are lessons within our lives that may be much more apparent in the darkness of our despair because we focus more intensely where there are fewer things to see. It is like walking into a dark room. At first, we can see nothing. Yet after our eyes have had a chance to focus, we begin to see particular items in the room, even though the room is still dark. Likewise, we can have some very profound insights about the areas of our life that need improvement while we are quietly lying in bed, recovering from an illness away from our hectic daily routines. Exercise 3. 다음 글의 제목으로 가장 적절한 것은 Privacy has not always characterized American families. Before the 19th century, people felt free to enter others' homes and tell them what to wear and how to treat their children. The development of the value of family privacy and autonomy emerged with the separation of home and work and the growth of cities during the late 19th century. Innovations in the amenities available within the home over the years, indoor plumbing, refrigerators, telephones, radios, television, central air conditioning, home computers, tablets, and smart speakers, for example, have all increased the privacy and isolation of American households. Our need to leave home for entertainment, goods, or services has been considerably reduced. Air conditioners, for instance, allow us to spend hot, stuffy summer evening inside our own homes instead of on the front porch or at the local ice cream shop. With the internet, text messaging, social media, and home shopping cable networks, family members can survive without ever leaving the privacy of their home. The institution of family has become increasingly self-contained and private. Exercise 4. 다음 글의 제목으로 가장 적절한 것은 Social media and the possibility of connecting people across the globe through communication and information platforms may seem like a tool for tolerance because technology enables people to see and participate in worlds beyond their own. We often identify teens, in particular, as the great beneficiaries of this new cosmopolitanism. However, when we look at how social media is adopted by teens, it becomes clear that the internet doesn't level inequality in any practical or widespread way. The patterns are all too familiar. Prejudice, racism, and intolerance are pervasive. Many of the social divisions that exist in the offline world have been replicated and in some cases amplified online. Those old divisions shape how teens experience social media and the information that they encounter. This is because while technology does allow people to connect in new ways, it also reinforces existing connections. It does enable new types of access to information, but people's experiences of that access are uneven at best. Chapter 7, 도표 정보 파악은 넘어가겠습니다. 네, Chapter 8, 내용 일치, 불일치 파악. 이 부분은 넘어가도록 하겠습니다. Chapter 9, 어법 정확성 파악. Exercise 1. A, B, C의 각 네모 안에서 어법에 맞는 표현으로 가장 적절한 것은 Multilingual realities arise in a number of ways. Immigrants, whether settlers or invaders, bring languages into contact, and sometimes, as with imperialist and colonial expansion, it is unnecessary for many people to physically move. Their language may make its presence felt through military, religious, or economic force, requiring relatively small numbers of soldiers, merchants, bureaucrats, and missionaries. Some cultures have had more explicit policies here than have others, but all imperial powers have, directly or indirectly, made their languages attractive and sometimes necessary to conquered or colonized groups. The languages of expansionist regimes often become intertwined with pragmatic advantage and cultural prestige at a local level, and these factors often long outlive the original dominating influence. The continued adherence to European varieties which exist in former colonial areas is an example here. Exercise 2. 다음 글에 밑줄 친 부분 중 어법상 틀린 부분은 A graduate student in history has a paper to write on the French Revolution. Her grandfather is a professor of history, and when he did his PhD, it was a lot of work to pull together even 10 citations for a midterm paper. For the student, every paper and book she has ever read on the French Revolution is instantly available in her e-memory. Besides the main text and 4 papers she is using in class, she pulls up another 23 references that she has encountered over the years. She's able to refresh her memory on a few points and use several quotes from the old papers. What would have taken her father a full day at a library takes her just an hour. Not only is her paper stronger, but her memory of the subject has been reinforced and her big picture understanding is broader. Exercise 3. A, B, C의 각 네모 안에서 어법에 맞는 표현으로 가장 적절한 것은? There is no question that a large amount of communication among humans is intentional, but much unintentional signaling takes place as well. For example, in many cultures, someone giving a friendly greeting to another person raises or her eyebrows for a moment. This facial gesture is called eyebrow flashing. Unless we make a conscious effort to think about it, we are not aware of having performed an eyebrow flash. Even the receiver may not be aware of having seen the eyebrow flash, despite the fact that it is a very important aspect of the greeting and alters the receiver's interpretation of the words spoken at the time. As Irenaeus Ibisfeld has demonstrated, greetings made without the eyebrow flash are interpreted as less friendly, even when the spoken words are identical. People in some cultures do not eyebrow flash, and this can create unintentional difficulties in intercultural communication. There are many other examples of what is called nonverbal communication in humans, most of which are both signaled and received unintentionally. Exercise 4. 다음 글에 밑줄 친 부분 중 어법상 틀린 것은? Humanity's shared evolutionary history means that all human bodies are alike, and so too are all human minds. Dylan Evans calls this the psychological unity of humankind. Not only are the 6 basic emotions universal, they're also instinctual and innate biological responses over which we have little conscious control. This means that we are hardwired to respond to certain stimuli in certain ways. Our brains automatically appraise our experiences as they occur and create emotional responses to correspond with that unconscious appraisal. This means that these emotional responses occur without us having thought about them. Paul Ekman talks about autoappraisers. The autonomic appraisal mechanisms which occur unconsciously in response to visual, auditory, and sensory triggers, and create the physiological responses we call emotions. Basically, this means that when confronted by something which we find threatening, humans unconsciously respond in particular physical and emotional ways. The sensations we experience as anger are the physiological preparations the body makes in order to protect itself. Exercise 5. A, B, C의 각 네모 안에서 어법에 맞는 표현으로 가장 적절한 것은? At any given time, the experts in a society determine the nature of current understanding. One who understands physics in Aristotle's time applied a different body of principles in a different way from one who understands physics in a Newtonian age, and the breakthroughs associated with relativity theory and quantum mechanics have brought about further alterations in the contemporary understanding of the physical world. Understanding about the world of people does not evolve in so dramatic a fashion. Sophocles is far closer to Shakespeare than Aristotle is to Galileo. Yet, just as the wise elder possesses deeper insights into human nature than does the brighter youngster, knowledge obtained from social and cultural studies has altered our notions of the human individual and of human society. For example, in light of psychoanalytic discoveries, a developed understanding of human behavior involves recognition of unconscious motivation. Exercise 6. 다음 글에 밑줄 친 부분 중 어법상 틀린 것은? Although the prevalent emotional tone of infant-directed talk is warm and affectionate, parents of older infants vary it to convey important information. For example, a mother's no uttered with sharply falling intonation tells the baby that the mother disapproves of something, whereas a cooed yes indicates approval. The same intonational qualities are used by mothers to signal approval and disapproval across languages, from English to Italian to Japanese. That infants use the intonation of the mother's messages to interpret meaning was clearly established by Anne Fernald in a series of clever experiments. In one, 8-month-old infants were presented with an attractive toy, and their mothers either said, "Yes, good boy," or "No, don't touch." Half the statements of each type were said in a cooing, encouraging tone of voice, and half were said in a sharp, prohibitive tone. The infants played with the toy more when their mother's tone of voices were encouraging, regardless of what she actually said. Exercise 7. A, B, C의 각 네모 안에서 어법에 맞는 표현으로 가장 적절한 것은? What employees want is to be stretched beyond their day-to-day tasks. No matter how inexperienced people are, they need to be challenged to grow. Finding small ways to test their skills and expand their experience helps people grow. In some companies, there are slack time lists that allow people to take on a different tasks outside their everyday work when things are slow or they're waiting for direction. These tasks are important but not urgent. It might be to build on a collection of data or research work, all things that you'd love to accomplish if only you had the time. This way you can keep your staff productive and there are lulls in the schedule. Anybody can add to the slack time list. It simply needs to be approved by someone in authority to make sure the tasks are worth performing. Exercise 8. 다음 글에 밑줄 친 부분 중 어법상 틀린 것은? Our love affair with shopping began in ancient Rome, the city that became the center of the world's commerce. More than 1 million people lived in Rome by the 3rd century AD. In order to feed this unprecedented population, vast warehouses and markets were needed, such as the fruit and vegetable market at the Forum Holitorium and the cattle market at Forum Boarium. But the Romans were not satisfied with food alone. The specialist shops whose window displays catch our eye on Main Street or in the mall made their first appearance in Rome, where there were shops for books, for precious stones, and furniture. Rome even had the first supermarkets, known as Huria. Many Romans lived in tabernae, consisting of 1 or 2 rooms which opened directly onto the street and which, as well as homes, doubled as shops or workrooms. Indeed, look around the alleys and squares of old Rome today, and you will see that there are still many shops that open onto the street, often without glazing or doors, and which are sealed at night using shutters. Chapter 10. 어휘 적절성 파악. Exercise 1. A, B, C의 각 네모 안에서 문맥에 맞는 낱말로 가장 적절한 것은? Social loafing is thought to occur because of a division of responsibility in groups. When group members work together on a single task and it is difficult to determine who is working hard and who is not, responsibility for the outcome is diffused or shared over the entire group. Whether the outcome is considered a success or a failure, group members share their credit relatively equally. This decreases the incentive for any individual to work hard because there is only a loose connection between their individual effort and the outcomes for the group. Extra effort may have little or no effect on the outcome for the group and will have absolutely no effect on the credit for the outcome that an individual receives, as long as the individual appears to be trying hard. The result is a kind of free rider problem whereby each individual slacks off a little bit, and in the end, the performance of the entire group suffers. Exercise 2. 다음 글에 밑줄친 부분 중 문맥상 낱말의 쓰임이 적절하지 않은 것은? Animals in the wild see humans as a threat and are usually fearful of human contact. This is an important survival instinct in animals for whom staying away from humans is vital to their survival. In a captive setting where animals are dependent on humans for all their welfare and are exposed all day to hundreds of visitors, fear of humans over a prolonged period may be harmful to the animal's health and mental well-being. Long-term experience of fear may result in poor mental health, manifest in self-harm, conditioned helplessness, or displaced aggression on cage mates. A highly fearful animal will hide, become helpless and depressed, and may even sustain wounds through trying to escape from the contact with humans. Simple daily occurrences such as feeding and cleaning can be stressful for both the animal and the keeper. Exercise 3. A, B, C의 각 네모 안에서 문맥에 맞는 낱말로 가장 적절한 것은? Needless to say, an artist might clarify her feelings by just focusing on them mentally. That is, it is at least conceivable that one could get clear on one's emotional state simply by thinking about it. The emotion, then, would be clarified but not externalized. Yet could an artist exist entirely, so to speak, inside someone's head? This would appear to violate our ordinary understanding of art, which regards an artwork as a public affair. It would also seem inconsistent with the notion of expression, which fundamentally rests on the idea of something inside being brought outside. Thus, in order to block cases of completely mental artworks, the expression theorists should add that the process of the clarification and transmission of emotion should be secured by means of lines, shapes, colors, sounds, actions, and or words. This guarantees that an artwork is at least in principle publicly accessible, that it is embodied in some publicly accessible medium. Exercise 4. 다음 글에 밑줄 친 부분 중 문맥상 낱말의 쓰임이 적절하지 않은 것은? The economy of life produces astonishing outcomes. Among these is sting anatomy, the horrible process in which a stinging insect self-eviscerates, leaving a stinger embedded in the target's flesh. The suicidal behavior troubled Charles Darwin as he formulated his theory of natural selection. He pondered how killing oneself could promote passing fitness via descendants to future generations. An insect's self-evisceration could provide strong evidence against his theory, amazingly, even though Gregor Mendel's genetics, much less the modern concept of DNA, were unknown to Darwin. He came up with essentially the correct answer. By facilitating the reproduction of your close relatives, mainly nestmates, your lineage would be passed down by a relative because of your selfless sacrifice. Sting autonomy maximizes the pain and damage of a sting, thereby aiding in the defense of the colony against large predators. Exercise 5. ABC의 각 네모 안에서 문맥에 맞는 낱말로 가장 적절한 것은? What is the profile of our emotional life as we age? Despite the image of older people as cranky or resentful of the young, Laura Cartenson, a researcher of aging at Stanford University, shows that our daily emotional experience is actually enhanced with age. Typically, older people experience more positive emotions than negative ones in daily life. The experience isn't purely happy. Rather, our emotions grow richer and more complex over time. We experience more co-occurrence of positive and negative emotions, such as those poignant occasions when you get a tear in the eye at the same time you feel joy, or feeling pride at the same time you feel anger, a capacity we call emotional complexity. These mixed emotional states help us avoid the dramatic ups and downs that younger people have, and they also help us exercise more control over what we feel. Mixed emotions are easier to manage than purely positive or purely negative emotions. Thus, emotionally speaking, life just feels better. Better control over emotions and increased complexity means more enriched daily experiences. People with more emotional complexity also have a longer health span. Exercise 6. Towns and cities in developing countries are unable to provide housing, infrastructure, and services in pace with their population growth, which is typically much faster than it ever was in Europe. The result is unplanned slums without basic services, where conditions are miserable. This encourages politicians and donor agencies to regard urbanization as negative. But the growth of slums is neither an inevitable consequence of urbanization, nor can it be blamed only on the lack of financial resources. Slums are also the product of failed policies, bad governance, inappropriate legal and regulatory frameworks, unresponsive financial systems, corruption, and not least, a lack of political will. Some governments even compound the problems by limiting access to land and services for low-income migrants. But policies focused on stopping migration or compelling people to leave urban areas, even though massive evictions, are useless. This hounding of poor has instead made their life even harder. Exercise 7. Is value neutrality possible? Many sociologists believe it is impossible to set aside personal values and retain complete objectivity. They caution readers, rather, to understand that sociological studies may, by necessity, contain a certain amount of value bias. It does not discredit the results, but allows readers to view them as one form of truth rather than a singular fact. Some sociologists attempt to remain uncritical and as objective as possible when studying cultural institutions. Value neutrality does not mean having no opinions. It means striving to overcome personal biases, particularly subconscious biases, when analyzing data. It means avoiding skewing data in order to match a predetermined outcome that aligns with a particular agenda, such as a political or moral point of view. Investigators are ethically obligated to report results, even when they contradict personal views, predicted outcomes, or widely accepted beliefs. Exercise 8. 다음 글에 밑줄 친 부분 중 문맥상 낱말의 쓰임이 적절하지 않은 것은? Technology does not exist in isolation. It emerges out of specific economic, social, and political contexts. But technological change can make certain things possible, or more, or less likely. Technology was no threat to newspapers in the 1980s when computer typesetting and direct input revolutionized the industry, transforming the economics in the direction of huge potential increases in profitability. That new technology era allowed for enormous growth in the size of newspapers, pagination, with the resultant potential for growing advertising revenues. The current digital revolution allowing for delivery of words, pictures, and sound through screens and a vast limitless increase in the amount of information available through this medium is of course a challenge to newspapers, but not necessarily a terminal threat. It is that challenge newspapers are addressing now, in various ways, with varying investment and varying creativity and imagination. There is undoubtedly a lot of gloom to be found in newspapers' offices these days. That is not the whole story. It is also an exciting time for newspapers. Newspapers are not on death row. Chapter 11. Exercise 1. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? Many people are uncomfortable about sharing their values. They view the individual as the sole judge of what is right and what is wrong. This thinking leads us to a personal and situational view of ethics, namely, what I do is my own business. In this kind of culture, it is difficult to confront people when their values differ from those of the organization. In the book of Habits of the Heart, Robert Bellah and his associates explore the dangers of rampant individualism in our society. They suggest that if individualism is America's greatest strength, it may also be its greatest weakness if taken too far. When self-interest asserts itself at the expense of the broader community, then it becomes a problem. Exercise 2. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? The division of the world into rich and poor parallel the division of the world into coffee drinkers, overwhelmingly concentrated in the industrialized global north, and coffee workers even more concentrated in the predominantly agricultural and perceptually developing global south. As the most valuable agricultural product of the world's poorest regions, coffee has played a central role in shaping this divide. In the last 150 years, coffee has become an exceptionally valuable commodity. Exports are now worth over $25 billion a year, and retail sales many times more. That is a virtual monopoly of the world's poorest nations. Coffee is not just one of the most important commodities in the history of global capitalism, as is commonly claimed. It is one of the most important commodities in the history of global inequality. Exercise 3. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은 It is time that often plays a crucial and defining role in environmental economics. Traditional economics can determine efficient ways to allocate resources for producing goods and services. The allocation is, however, simplified and confined to a single period of time, with the underlying presumption that the production of an additional unit of a commodity today does not prevent producing one tomorrow. In the case of many environmental goods, allocation of resources over a long period is critical. For example, while burning fossil fuels and polluting the environment today, we may be creating problems for future generations for years or forever. Similarly, if we harvest all prawns today, the supply will be gone forever. Our consumption decisions, if some environmental goods may be irreversible, it may have a profound impact on the well-being of future generations. Exercise 4. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은 Reflecting on the extremely rare occasions in which we fundamentally reframe our understanding of the universe causes us to think carefully about the limits on the role of science. Science is the art of measuring and of developing models to produce predictions. Decisions about scientific models often provoke deeper questions about why the universe is in the condition it is in. What actually is electrical charge? Or is there a gravitational pull between objects? Why do we have the particles we have and not others? Science presses hard on these questions, closing in as far as it may, but ultimately questions about why things are as they are, as opposed to what they are, lead us into the realms of philosophy and religion. Science can clear away much of the falsehood on the way, but the ultimate questions of reality call more for acts of belief than scientific explanation. It's a matter of opinion how far scientific models alone provide a full and satisfactory explanation. Exercise 5. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은 In explaining others' actions, we frequently commit the fundamental attribution error. We attribute to others' behavior so much to the inner dispositions that we discount important situational forces. The error occurs partly because our attention focuses on the person, not on the situation. A person's race or sex is vivid and gets attention. The situational forces working on that person are usually less visible. Slavery was often overlooked as an explanation for slave behavior. The behavior was instead attributed to the slave's own nature. Until recently, the same was true of how we explain the perceived differences between woman and man. Because gender role constraints were hard to see, we attributed men's and women's behavior solely to their innate dispositions. the more people assume that human traits are fixed dispositions, the stronger are their stereotypes, and the greater the acceptance of racial inequities. Exercise 6. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은 Even though philosophy is a communal enterprise dedicated to exploring our justification for using the criteria we use to distinguish between, for example, moral and immoral actions, truth and falsity, reality and appearance, and more, philosophical discourse proceeds by argumentation. So, a philosopher might put forward correspondence to reality as a criterion for distinguishing a true belief from a false one. In order to determine whether that is an adequate criterion, other philosophers would critically discuss that proposal, and one might criticize it by pointing out that we have no means of telling whether or not an idea corresponds to reality because our access to reality is always mediated by our ideas. That's exactly how philosophical discussion develops, with all the parties to it advocating their own point of view, although they can jump ship and switch to the other side, at the same time that they are committed to jointly figuring out the correct answer to the question. Exercise 7. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은 Robert Putnam, a Harvard political scientist, Cass Sustain, a respected legal scholar and a former senior official in the Obama administration, and Ellie Pariser, the director of MoveOn.org, are among those who warn that cable and web-based media are creating and reinforcing a series of identity ghettos. Their argument is a variant of the old selective exposure thesis. We choose to be exposed only to media that reinforce the view that we already have. Their concern is that as people congregate in their own comfortable media enclaves, the opportunity to meet and exchange ideas with those who have different views is vanishing. Political activists, hockey fans, and followers of every imaginable show, game, music, video, or celebrity all gravitate not to great public spaces, but to the limited and protected confines of their own groups. As Pariser argues, by definition, a world constructed from the familiar is a world in which there's nothing to learn. For Pariser, the danger is that you can get stuck in a static, ever-narrowing version of yourself, an endless U loop. In the end, the user has become the content. Exercise 8. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은 Social infrastructures that promote efficiency tend to discourage interaction and the formation of strong ties. One recent study, for instance, shows that a daycare center that encourages caregivers and parents to walk in and wait for their children, often inside the classroom and generally at the same time fosters more social connections and supportive relationships than one where managers allow parents to come in on their own schedules and hurry through drop-off and pick-up so they can quickly return to their private lives. Because much of our hard infrastructure, highways, airports, food supply chains, and the like, is designed to promote better circulation of people or vital resources, it can accelerate the trend of social atomization. Think, for example, about the contrast between a village where everyone gets their water from the same well and a city where everyone gets their water from faucets in their private homes. Exercise 9. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은 Learning to work with color has many similarities with learning how to cook. A good recipe is no guarantee of success, but the secret of a first-rate outcome is often in preparation. The cook must constantly sample, taste, and make adjustments. The color in a scene can be thought of as the ingredients that make up the picture. Their arrangement and mixture will determine the final result. Two cooks can start off with the same ingredients, yet each produce a completed dish that tastes quite different from the other. Simply by making small changes in quantity, one of the ingredients will lose its identity, while another becomes more dominant. Cooking teaches that a successful meal involves more than reading a recipe. The same holds true for a photographer. Changes in color placement with a composition cause shifts in dominance, which can alter the entire feeling or mood of the picture. Also remember that properly presented food photographs show that the cook photograph has thought about every stage of the dining visual experience and set the psychological stage for the diner's viewer's response. Exercise 10. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? In thinking about the ancient foragers, modern models loom large. They are a lens through which the remains of ancient lives have been interpreted. This poses a methodological problem, for ancient and modern foragers are profoundly different. Despite these differences, we can use modern data to answer important questions about ancient lives. In favorable cases, we can correct for the differences between ancient and modern foraging worlds. In particular, in considering the cooperative foraging model of human life history, modern data offer a conservative test. The ancient to modern transition would tend to reduce the significance of a class of important features of ancient forager lifestyles, ones that make cooperation more important. So if we still find those features playing a role in the lives of modern foragers, we can reasonably project them back onto the lives of ancient foragers. Exercise 11. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? It is entirely reasonable to suppose that religion, despite its flaws, has been one of the great humanizing movements of recent European history. It was religion, not secular thought, that advanced the view that nature is founded on a deep rationality. Among the greatest defenders of reason and philosophical thought were Anselm and Aquinas, who believed that since God created the universe through the Logos, the divine wisdom, the universe must be supremely rational. It is no accident that modern science took root and flourished in a basically Christian society. Copernicus was a canon of the Catholic Church. Kepler studied the heavens believing that they manifested the wisdom and beauty of God. Newton formulated the laws of nature in the belief that the wise author of nature must have ordered the cosmos in accordance with rational and comprehensible principles. An important motivating force in science is the belief that there are comprehensible, elegant, and mathematical beautiful laws in nature. It does not have to be that way unless there is a supremely rational creator. Exercise 12. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? Cholera, a horrific disease acquired by drinking water contaminated with infected fecal matter, was more than a symbol of an interconnected globe. It was a physical, presence. Its dramatic and sudden arrival in Europe in 1831 threw many into fits of fear. It signaled to some the arrival of a new plague. Some people fled, just as they had during plague epidemics. Others stayed. Fear of cholera was at times out of proportion to the actual threat. In 1831, as cholera made its way through Russia, the anxious English awaited its arrival. Newspapers, pamphlets, and rumor spread fear of the disease. But Dr. James Johnson, editor of the Medico-Chirurgical Review, cautioned the press in a letter to the Times. It will hardly be doubted that the terrible malady, cholera-phobia, rages at this moment, epidemically, through every spot of the British Isles. The cholera-phobia will frighten to death a far greater number of Britons that the monster itself will ever destroy by its actual presence. Chapter 12. 흐름에 무관한 문장 찾기. Exercise 1. 다음 글에서 전체 흐름과 관계없는 문장은 As scientific knowledge has substantially expanded, our approach to knowledge may have changed. The earlier naive beliefs in undeniable truths have given way to the contextualization of knowledge, dramatically expressed as end of grand narratives. This is evident in the changing approaches towards expert knowledge, from full trust in the skills of the expert to a reserved trust, which places a higher burden of judgment on the individuals and the society. A major shift from science to research is identified in the production of scientific knowledge. According to this shift, knowledge becomes less final and more open to change. Science was associated with certainty, coldness, aloofness, objectivity, distance, and necessity. But research was, in contrast, uncertain, open-ended, immersed in many lowly problems of money, instruments, and know-how. Exercise 2. 다음 글에서 전체 흐름과 관계없는 문장은 The early modern readers of travel accounts were likely to be interested in the descriptions of far-off peoples and places, but travel literature has also historically served to promote national, religious, and cultural identities. Simon Schama has suggested that the struggle to control the sea was an important aspect of the emerging Dutch identity. An identity won through transformative ordeals. Stories describing Dutchmen persevering in the face of tremendous difficulties gave the Dutch something similar to a heroic epic that formed the essence of what it meant to be Dutch in the 17th century. Through stories like those presented in travel literature, the Dutch represented themselves by creating a type of heroic myth. Travel literature has always been associated with the construction of utopias, which were founded on the idea of unknown lands. This was a myth in the sense of a popular conception of a person or a thing which exaggerates or idealizes the truth, rather than a completely fictitious story. Exercise 3. 다음 글에서 전체 흐름과 관계없는 문장은 You may notice that certain smells make it harder for your baby to calm down and enter into a state of shared attention with you. If you're wearing a strong perfume or aftershave lotion, does he turn his head away when you approach him? If you suspect that your child may have sensitivities or may be underreactive to various smells, try putting different foods or fragrances near his nose and see if he recoils or frowns with annoyances or fails to show any reaction at all. It's a good idea to check out your baby's olfactory smelling responses, since smell and taste are close sensory cousins. Some children with hypersensitives to smells can't handle food if it is too pungent, while others may need stronger odors and taste to help them tolerate certain food groups. Exercise 4. 다음 글에서 전체 흐름과 관계없는 문장은 In a political debate, you feel that the other side just doesn't get your point of view, and if they could only see things with your clarity, they would understand and fall naturally in line with what you believe. They must not understand, because if they did, they wouldn't think the things they think. By contrast, you believe you totally get their point of view and you reject it. You don't need to hear them elaborate on it because you already know it better than they do. So each side believes it understands the other side better, then the other side understands both its opponents and itself. Exercise 5. 다음 글에서 전체 흐름과 관계없는 문장은 We're all prone to overestimate our abilities as well as our power to control our destiny. People have a false sense of security on the highway because they consider themselves above average drivers and expect their skill to protect them, even though many accidents are caused by factors beyond their control. Similarly, when asked how long it will take to complete a project, people typically underestimate the time because they are too confident in themselves and don't allow for delays beyond their control. This optimism bias causes people to underestimate the risk of some types of negative events in their own lives. They're fully aware that something bad can happen. In fact, they often have an unrealistically high expectation that it will happen, but they tell themselves it will happen to someone else. Exercise 6. 다음 글에서 전체 흐름과 관계없는 문장은 Elections are an important part of political systems in many countries, both for governments and for many groups within and between countries. People vote for the leaders of their national government and their local government, their staff representatives on the boards of large organizations, and the leaders of their professional societies. Voting is believed to deliver representatives who are anchored somewhat to the wishes of their electorate, and as such, voting is seen as a vital input in discovering the material interests of the voting population. Voting is therefore something that governments generally wish to encourage, and policymakers may be asked to recommend interventions that would increase vote turnout. Some countries, such as Australia, fine citizens who do not vote, and others simply set up polling places and entreat people to overcome. Exercise 7. 다음 글에서 전체 흐름과 관계없는 문장은 Cultures are tricky. Once people believe in one, they will find it difficult to accept evidence that challenges it. An internal logic is at work, a selective interpretation of evidence, a tendency to interpret experience in line with what people already believe. If we are able to step back from what we believe for a moment and see culture for what it really is, we will recognize that what we all believe is in large part the product of our social life. Therefore, those who disagree with our basic beliefs are neither fools nor free actors. They are usually a part of a social world that sees reality differently from us. What they believe may or may not be truer than what we believe, but all of us should not be as tempted to be certain that we have the truth. Exercise 8. 다음 글에서 전체 흐름과 관계없는 문장은 As for medieval thinkers, it was taken as an unquestionable fact that the heavens were perfect, and therefore all motion in heaven had to display perfection, and thus be circular. There was no scope for irregularities within the heavenly spheres. This belief caused terrible problems when it came to observing the orbits of the planets and their retrograde motion. Somehow, what was observed had to be resolved in terms of perfect circles. Although medieval thinkers were logical, they used deductive logic. In other words, they started with principles and theories, e.g., the heavenly spheres are the realms of perfection, perfect and eternal motion is circular, and then deduced what observations ought to follow. This was in stark contrast to inductive arguments, as used by later science, where evidence is gathered as the basis for framing a theory. Chapter 13. 문단 내 글의 순서 파악하기. 문단 내 글의 순서 파악하기는 답이 반영된 순서대로 읽도록 하겠습니다. Exercise 1. 주어진 글 다음에 이어질 글의 순서로 가장 적절한 것은 The performance of individuals in your reference groups can affect your self-esteem. For example, if being good at science is important to you, knowing that someone in your reference group always scores much higher than you on science tests can lower your self-esteem. To protect their self-esteem, make themselves feel better, people sometimes compare themselves with those who are not as good, a strategy called downward social comparison. They may also sometimes engage in upward social comparison, in which they compare themselves with people who are doing much better than they are. At first glance, this might not seem sensible. For some people, it can be discouraging. But upward social comparison can also create optimism about improving our own performance. We may tell ourselves, if they can do it, so can I. Or we might tell ourselves that the superior performer is not really similar enough to be in our reference groups, or even the ability in question is not that important to us. Exercise 2. 다음 글 다음에 이어질 글의 순서로 가장 적절한 것은 Turkey provides a good example of very deliberate language planning designed to achieve certain national objectives and to do this very quickly. When Kemal Atatürk, the father of the Turks, established the modern Republic of Turkey, he was confronted with the task of modernizing their language. It had no vocabulary from modern science and technology, was written in an unsuitable Arabic orthography, and was strongly influenced by both Arabic and Persian. In the late 1920s, Ataturk deliberately adopted the Roman script for his new modern Turkish. This effectively cut the Turks off from the Islamic past and directed their attention toward both their Turkish roots and their future as Turks in a modern world. Since only 10% of the population was literate, there was no mass objection to the changes. It was possible to use the new script almost immediately in steps taken to increase the amount of literacy in the country. Exercise 3. 주어진 글 다음에 이어질 글의 순서로 가장 적절한 것은 Imagine you have just returned from a 7th grade field trip. You had to take pictures of 6 different kinds of leaves, needles from trees, and identify it. The teacher was giving out hints and information as the class walked through the forest. You recorded what you thought you were seeing as you took the pictures. This leaf is pricky. That one is smooth. This one smells like turpentine. You compared notes with your friends and figured out that the couple were wrong. So you added new audio recordings to the pictures, correctly identifying the picture. Back in the class, teacher shows pictures the students have taken, and the class had to guess the species. Audio is played back to indicate the correct answer. This memorable field trip sticks with you. Years later, when you are 40 years old and find yourself telling your daughter about the scaly quality of a sitter, the sounds and sights from that old field trip are what come into your mind. And you bring them up to show your daughter. Exercise 4. 주어진 글 다음에 이어질 글의 순서로 가장 적절한 것은? To reduce the waste of inspection and checking in the office, everyone has to play by a new set of rules. In a sense, a new paradigm. This begins with an understanding that defects are caused by the way work is performed. If work is performed correctly, inspections are not needed. Generally, the inspection process exists only because of a fear of mistakes made during the work process. Inspections reveal defects only after they have already occurred. Stated another way, inspections discover waste. The inspection process itself does not add value. In fact, it becomes another form of waste. Moreover, this new form of waste is often multi-layered. Think, for example, of the time and effort expended by the people performing the inspections and the number of inspection reports that they generate. These reports must be read, responded to, or acted upon, and then filed or stored, creating more waste. Exercise 5. 주어진 글 다음에 이어질 글의 순서로 가장 적절한 것은? There are inevitably times when people care more about justice being visited upon the overprivileged and powerful than about becoming better off themselves. Following the 2010 British Petroleum BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, BP set about compensating local fishermen with out-of-court settlements totaling several $billion. But for one shrimp producer from Grand Isle, Louisiana, this wasn't what he wanted. I want my day in court, he said. If they can get off with just paying the money, well, they've got plenty of money. They're not really going to learn a lesson. Viewed unkindly, this is a demand for vengeance. More sympathetically, it shows that principles of justice and fair punishment are as valid within the economy as anywhere else and cannot be balanced using money alone. Either way, this fisherman was expressing something that is incomprehensible from the rationalist perspective of economics. It is a demand that English political philosopher Thomas Hobbes would have understood, that the force of the law should apply to all equally, but which an increasingly technocratic governing class often can't. Exercise 6. 주어진 글 다음에 이어질 글의 순서로 가장 적절한 것은? Contamination pathway. In the first known case of an outbreak associated with imported mangoes is particularly paradoxical. In 1999, 78 people in the 13 U.S. states became ill from a common strain of Salmonella enterica. 15 patients were hospitalized and 2 died. Investigators traced the mangoes back to the farm in Brazil. They discovered that, surprisingly, no Europeans who had consumed mangoes from the same farm were affected. Investigators deduced that the mangoes destined for the U.S. had probably absorbed the microbe as a result of a hot water treatment used to fight off fruit flies. The treatment was required to meet U.S. standards, barring produce carrying the Mediterranean fruit fly standards the European did not impose. The farmer had adopted the hot water treatment to avoid employing cancer-causing pesticides to fight off the fruit flies. But investigators discovered that dipping the mangoes in hot water, then submerging them in cool water before packing initiated a process in which gases inside the fruit contracted, drawing in contaminated water. So steps that the farmer had taken to clear the mangoes of insects without using carcinogens had ultimately provided an entry for pathogen. Exercise 7. 주어진 글 다음에 이어질 글의 순서로 가장 적절한 것은 Increasing urbanization, particularly in the developing world, complicates the issue of secure and expensive food supplies. Urbanization increases the demand for surplus food production from the countryside and, consequently, the pressure on rural areas to produce more. To avoid high food prices and urban unrest, most governments subsidize food prices. This has been true throughout history. Unfortunately, cheap food leads to the impoverishment of rural populations as well as to environmental degradation. Historically, the initial response to agricultural development has been a dramatic reduction in rural populations through migrations to cities, a process that poses huge risks of social unrest in countries like China. While this transition took a century or more in developed countries, it is happening much faster in many developing countries. Recently, it has become apparent that market prices for agricultural goods can no longer support rural populations. This problem is accentuated as rural populations see the standard of living of urban populations rising and wish to emulate it. Exercise 8. 주어진 글 다음에 이어질 글의 순서로 가장 적절한 것은 In 1994, the small desert village of Sefidabé in southeastern Iran was utterly destroyed by an earthquake. The curious thing was that Sefidabé is exceedingly remote, one of the few stops on a long trade route to the Indian Ocean. It's the only settlement for 100 kilometers in any direction. And yet, the earthquake seemed to target the village with unusual precision. It turns out that Sefidabé had been built right on top of a thrust fault lying far underground. The fault was so deep that it had created no obvious signs of its existence on the surface, such as a tail scarp, and so hadn't been previously identified by geologists. In hindsight, the only sign was an unremarkable, gently folded ridge running alongside the town, which had slowly been built up over hundreds of thousand years of earthquake movements. The settlement had grown here because this continual tectonic upthrusting maintained springs at the base of the ridge, the only water source for miles around. Tectonic fault had created the conditions allowing life in the desert, but it also had the potential to kill.